Story 1. The snow had been falling steadily all evening, just heavy enough to make the road slick and visibility poor. I had been driving for over 8 hours, delivering pallets from a warehouse to destinations throughout the region for my employer. This was my normal route, one I could practically do with my eyes closed. But the weather was slowing me down more than expected. I was already a couple hours behind schedule, that I wasn't too concerned. My boss was pretty laid back and understood delays, especially with the snow coming down. I took my time, not wanting to risk an accident on the winding back roads. Other than the weather, it had been an uneventful Friday night. But that was all about to change. I was on a remote stretch of highway, surrounded by nothing but fields and trees. With no other cars in sight, I switched on my high beams to better illuminate the road. Up ahead, I noticed a flickering glow through the heavy snow. As I drew closer, the light grew brighter and more defined. It was a hot, swirling blaze fire. My pulse quickened. Was it a burning vehicle? A downed power line? I'd ease off the gas, squinting to make out the source. But the fat, wet flakes descending rapidly made it impossible. The flames seemed to be right beside the road, but I couldn't pinpoint it exactly. I tapped the brakes tentatively, not wanting to lose control on the slippery pavement. Suddenly, I saw it looming right in front of me, a massive inferno, almost the width of the highway. In my effort to avoid a slow skid, I had drastically underestimated its proximity. Panicked, I slammed on the brakes with all my strength. The trailer instantly began to fishtail violently behind the cab. My heart dropped as I felt everything sliding, pictured the rig jackknifing and careening into the towering blaze ahead. Instinctively, I let up on the brakes, the tension on the cab loosening as the trailer slowly straightened back out, though still swaying menacingly. Fighting to maintain control, I managed to bring the shaky rig to a stop on the shoulder. My chest heaved, hands trembling from the close call. After a moment to collect myself, I peered out and was relieved to see the fire off to the side, not blocking the road. Cautiously exiting the cab, the bitter cold hit me instantly, snow blowing sideways in the wind. On a short embankment, a car was fully engulfed in flames. The fire raged hot and angry, but appeared contained around the vehicle. Scanning the scene, there was no one in sight. No obvious skid marks or debris from an accident. A sick feeling washed over me. What if someone was trapped inside that inferno? I called out, but got no response over the roar of the blaze. With shaking hands, I dialed 911. But being in such a remote area, they said it would be 10 to 15 minutes before emergency crews could arrive. Helpless, I watched the flames consume the car. How could it have caught fire like this? It didn't seem right. That's when the first prickle of unease shuddered through me. Glancing around the desolate scene once more, an unsettling thought emerged. What if this was intentional? The car seemed totally intact, strategically positioned away from the road. This was no accident. I spun back toward my truck, anxious to be inside its fragile protection. "Hey, hold up." A man's voice suddenly rang out, startling me. Peering into the swirling snow, two figures materialized, approaching swiftly. I could just make out ski masks covering their faces. My stomach knotted tightly. Some kind of fire, huh? Crazy night, I offered uneasily. They traded looks and remained silent, their body language confrontational. As they drew closer, I sensed them sizing me up. Every instinct screamed these were bad men with malicious intent. Making up an excuse to leave, I tried slipping past them to my truck. A firm hand grabbed my shoulder, halting me. "Going somewhere?" the taller man growled. Before I could react, he pulled a handgun from his coat and pressed it under my ribs. I froze, unable to breathe or speak. Roughly grabbing my arm, he forced me stumbling back down into the ditch towards the blaze, his partner close behind. Thoughts raced wildly. They did this, they'll kill me next. We came to a stop halfway between the raging fire and road. His grip tightened, the gun jabbing harder into my side. "Empty your pockets. Now," he barked. Hands fumbling, I complied, turning over my wallet, phone, keys. His partner quickly snatched them up, pocketing my valuables. He patted me down while the other held the gun on me, ensuring I had nothing else. Satisfied with their plunder, he leaned in close. For your sake, pretend you were never here. Understand? Confused, but nodding rapidly, I managed to force out a weak okay. With that, he released me with a shove. I stumbled but caught myself. Without another word, the two figures melted back into the swirling snow toward the highway. I stood there shaking, trying to process what just happened. Were they letting me go? Why? It didn't make sense. But I wasn't about to question my unbelievable luck. I peered down the road and could just make out their shadowy forms climbing into a pickup parked a ways back that I must have passed earlier. In seconds, the taillights faded into the snowy darkness, leaving me alone once again with just the furious blaze and howling wind. I climbed back to my rig and locked myself safely inside, reaching for the CB radio to update my boss. But it now dawned on me that not only had they taken my phone, but my wallet too with ID. I had no way to verify who I was to police when they arrived. An ambulance for shock was requested by my boss after hearing what transpired. But in rural areas like this, response times are painfully slow under the best conditions. The 20-minute wait felt endless. I couldn't stop replaying the encounter in my mind. Who were they? Why not kill me when they clearly had no issue murdering someone else tonight? It didn't add up. I had come face to face with evil itself out here on this desolate highway. Two killers who decided to rob me rather than take my life for witnessing their vicious crime. I knew in my gut the car was a crypt. Someone was burning inside. Finally, flashing lights appeared through the flurries. I gave a statement describing the men. They confirmed finding a body in the car, burned beyond recognition. The killers were never caught. In the coming days, I struggled to process it all. My wife insisted I find a new job, afraid they would come after me. But I knew the truth. They had no reason to silence a witness if the death was random violence. Whoever died in that car was their actual target, not some unlucky passerby. I'll never know why I was allowed to walk away with my life that night. Maybe a momentary flicker of mercy in the heart of a soulless killer granted me grace. Or was it a perverse enjoyment at knowing I'll forever be looking over my shoulder now? Perhaps I seemed unlikely to convince police it wasn't just an accident. The motives of monsters cannot be understood through a lens of reason or empathy. But not a day goes by that I don't think of the twisted turn my life could have taken that night. I'm eternally grateful for the outcome, spared by the wings of wickedness. But it taught me evil does move among us, hidden behind masks, until that pivotal moment it strikes without warning or remorse. We all like to believe angels protect the innocent. But sometimes demons decide your fate instead for reasons only the damned comprehend. And should that grim reaper cast his gaze your way, no guardian spirit can save you from that remorseless blade. Story 2. My name is John, and I've been driving a taxi in the city of Springfield for over 15 years. Before moving here, I actually lived in the city of White Sand and drove a taxi there as well. Recently, a lot of new rideshare services like Uber have been popping up. But this event happened years ago before any of that even existed. For context, Springfield has brutally cold and snowy winters. Temperatures regularly drop below freezing. The taxi company I worked for wasn't your typical yellow cab service. We use our own cars with magnetic signs to identify us as taxis. This allowed us to set our own hours instead of working scheduled shifts. The company took a cut of our fares in exchange. At the time, this felt like an ideal setup. I never committed to a strict schedule, just driving whenever I felt like it day to day. Around the holidays, I worked longer hours since demand increased with people out shopping and celebrating. I didn't have any family in town and lived alone, so the holidays felt like any other day to me. This particular incident happened on Christmas Eve one year. I started driving around 10 a.m. and business was booming. There was practically no downtime between fares all day. With the holiday rush, customers didn't mind paying more, and I was averaging around $80 an hour, which was great money for me. By 8 p.m., I had put in a solid 10-hour day, but was still raking in the cash. Around that time, though, light snow started falling. I figured I still had a bit more time to work before the weather got bad. I stopped quickly at a diner to grab a bite, then headed back out to make as much money as I could before the snow picked up. With other drivers already calling it quits, there was less competition on the roads. I picked up a group heading home to the poorer neighborhood of Willow Creek. The homes there were old, crammed together on tiny lots. The passengers were pleasant though and tipped well. As I pulled away, a man suddenly emerged from behind a parked car, arm extended as if hailing me. Through the thickening snowfall and darkness, I could barely make out his features. He wore a dark hoodie with the hood drawn up and had a nervous energy about him. Still, it wasn't uncommon in that area. I pulled up next to him and he quickly slid into the back seat. "Where to?" I asked casually, continuing down the street. He didn't answer right away. Glancing in the rearview mirror, I could see him staring blankly out the window. "Sir, where can I take you tonight?" I repeated, more deliberate this time. He made fleeting eye contact before reaching into his pocket and shakily producing a torn piece of paper. "Just take me here," he muttered, passing it to me. Scribbled on it was an address on a street I didn't recognize. Having driven in Springfield for years, I knew most of the major roads. This one was unfamiliar, making me wonder if it was located well outside the city limits. With the snow picking up, I wasn't sure I could make such a long trip. I entered the address into my rarely used GPS at a stop sign. No results came up. I double-checked the paper, making sure I had typed it correctly. "Sir, I don't know where this address is," I told the man, turning to face him. "Just pull over here," he suddenly barked in an authoritative tone. It dawned on me then what was happening, but I stayed calm and steered to the curb. The surrounding street was deserted. No people, no traffic, just the glow of street lights on the falling snow. I shifted into park, staring straight ahead silently. In the back seat, the man glanced around nervously. Then, in an instant, he lunged between the front seats, one hand grabbing a fistful of my hair, while the other jammed a small pistol against my temple. He screamed at me to hand over my wallet, keys, phone, everything. But I was paralyzed by fear and pain as he ground the gun barrel forcefully into my skull. Furious at my hesitation, he smacked me hard in the back of the head with the weapon. My vision blurred and head exploded with nauseating pain. I fumbled to grab my wallet off the dash and tossed it back to him. But another brutal pistol whipping came, leaving me dazed and barely conscious. I must have blacked out briefly because the next thing I knew, the back door was flung open and the man was gone. My car too, along with my wallet, phone and keys. I was left battered and disoriented in the snow. My head throbbed horribly as I stumbled along the icy sidewalk to a gas station and called for help. It took over a week for police to locate my abandoned car far outside Springfield's city limits. Thankfully, I didn't suffer any permanent injuries, but replacing everything that was stolen, license, cards, phone, was a huge hassle. With no car, I couldn't work either until I saved up for another one. The whole ordeal was a nightmare. What haunts me most is how violently the guy reacted right from the start, when I would have just handed over my stuff if he had simply asked. I guess some people get a thrill from inflicting pain and terrorizing others. For me, that Christmas Eve attack ended any illusion that even on holidays, evil takes time off too. These days I drive for one of the city's bigger taxi fleets, where they provide the car and everything. It makes me feel safer, but I still get uneasy with certain passengers. I make sure to avoid working nights or holidays now, because I found out the hard way that just because it's Christmas doesn't mean all the monsters out there take a break. Story 3. Delivering pizzas was my part-time gig in high school. I worked mainly for Domino's, but also picked up weekend shifts at Jimmy John's for extra cash. I just want to make it clear. I wasn't some random newbie out making my first delivery ever. I knew the routine and the area well from months on the job. But what happened on this particular snowy night was anything but routine. Like most nights, I didn't take the order at Domino's. My coworkers handled that while I drove. I just grabbed the hot pizzas and go. This time was no different. I rushed in from my last delivery and picked up the next order. As I did, my coworker told me to make sure the guy pays in full. Seemed like an odd comment, so it stuck with me as I hurried out to my car. Sliding into the driver's seat, his words really sank in. Why had he specifically said that about this customer? I tried to brush it off. Probably just some cheapskate hoping for a discount. Still, it gnawed at me as I pulled onto the snowy roads. According to the ticket, the delivery was to an address about 10 minutes from the shop. It was just past 10 p.m., so the roads were pretty deserted. As I navigated cautiously through flurries, a car suddenly sped up behind me, tailgating dangerously close. I eased my foot off the gas, allowing them to pass. But they just matched my slower pace, hovering menacingly on my rear bumper. Strange, since there was no other traffic to impede them. The high beams in my mirror made it hard to identify the vehicle. I considered speeding up to get away, but road conditions and unfamiliarity with the heavy car made me hesitant. So I held my speed, hoping they'd either go around or turn off. But they stuck with me, following too closely for comfort. I felt uneasy, but figured the driver was just some jerk messing around late at night since the roads were empty. Still, I gripped the wheel tighter, hyper-focused through the snow. Up ahead, a traffic light turned yellow, and I began braking early. That's when the car whipped around me into the lane beside. I kept my eyes fixed ahead, but a man leaned out his open window shouting at me to roll mine down. I pretended not to notice, fiddling with the pizza box and waiting anxiously for green. The moment it turned, I hit the gas, tires slipping before catching pavement. But the man stayed right on me, driving erratically, trying to get my attention. Even with the falling snow, I could make out his menacing glare each time he pulled alongside. Who was this guy, and why was he harassing me? I was beyond annoyed, but admittedly a bit unnerved. I considered turning down a side street, but wasn't confident they were planned well enough to chance getting stuck alone out here with this creep. So I stuck to the main roads, hoping he'd give up his bizarre pursuit. But he persisted. His aggressive driving escalated until finally he gunned it and swerved sharply in front of me. I slammed the brakes hard, the car fishtailing on the slick road. We both lost control, sliding wildly before coming to rest along opposite shoulders. My heart pounded in my ears, hands shaking in a death grip on the wheel. After a few deep breaths, I regained composure and continued cautiously toward my destination. Glancing back, the man's car sat sideways, lodged in a snowbank. I sped up to put distance between us, doubting he could quickly free his vehicle. The side roads likely bought me enough time to deliver the pizzas before we got back on track. I felt a pang of guilt leaving him stranded, but his behavior was malicious. I wasn't about to play hero after the way he acted. Turning onto the designated street, I pulled in front of the indicated address. The house was dark, except for a dim porch light. I grabbed the insulated bag and trudged up the snowy walkway. After several knocks and rings of the doorbell, I stepped back unsure. Cold silence. I called my boss, who tried contacting the customer to no avail. Waiting on the unshoveled stoop, I got an ominous feeling. Why place an order and then disappear? I had a chilling thought. Could this be connected to the maniac who chased me? I hustled back to my car, cranking the heat to thaw my numbed fingers. Something felt very wrong about this whole situation. Rather than return the way I came, I took a winding route back to the pizza shop just in case the deranged driver was still lurking. I decided not to share my uneasy speculation with my boss. He didn't need to worry and would just think I was being paranoid. But deep down, I couldn't ignore the red flags. In retrospect, that angry customer likely planned the whole thing. He meant to follow me from the shop, force me to pull over in the snow, and rob me either of cash or the pizzas to avoid paying. But his reckless driving landed him in a drift instead. Without confirmation, I'll never know for certain if I narrowly avoided being carjacked that night by an increasingly desperate, potentially violent perpetrator. The absence from his home seems to support that chilling theory, though. and my boss's cryptic warning about payment takes on more sinister meaning in that context. For weeks afterwards, I remained on high alert, constantly checking my mirrors and taking roundabout routes. I even considered switching delivery jobs, not wanting to risk another late-night encounter with that madman or a similar predator. But my friends convinced me I was being irrational. What were the odds it would happen again? In the end, pragmatism won out. I needed the cash and couldn't let one freak incident forever taint something I was good at. But I did become much more cautious. No longer did I casually accept orders to unfamiliar, isolated places. Creeps are out there plotting to catch unsuspecting drivers alone. While not all may have violent intent, I learned firsthand how quickly a routine food delivery can take a terrifying turn once you leave that false sense of safety under the shop's lights. Like most teens, I felt invincible before that fateful night, just cruising around town late with some tunes and snacks. But suffering the wicked schemes of the criminally minded, even briefly, strips away any illusion of immunity. I emerged intact, but part of my innocence died along that desolate road. Some youthful optimism faded, but in its place grew the maturity of experience. I still trusted in the goodness of people, but could no longer deny darkness also lurks inside us all, waiting to strike the vulnerable when least expected. We must balance hope with caution in this world, for monsters wear familiar faces and hunger insidiously to feast. And if unaware, you may unknowingly deliver yourself right to their door.